Hey there, creatives. Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm really excited to bring this next episode to you. It is an interview with three creative arts therapists, different disciplines. And the focus of the conversation was about intersectionality and the expressive arts therapies, and specifically focusing on the therapist identity. And each therapist in the show today offers a unique lens from which they view the world and interact with the world, and we kind of talk about the gifts that have come from their experience, and the focus of the conversation is really to expand um, the idea that therapists can be differently abled and have different ranges of their ability to express, and how that unique perspective impacts the work and enhances the work, but also the challenges that one might experience as a result. And so I am going to be sharing with you this interview with several people. Reggie Matthew, who is an expressive arts therapist, um, Sara Tsutsumi, who is an arts therapist, and Marshall Lyles, who is a play therapist, but also integrates poetry and sand and EMDR in his work. And you might have heard him on an episode from last year of September of 2020, the voices from the Expressive Therapy Summit, episode 6, where I spoke with him about parts work in play and poetry therapy. And I just feel really honored to have this conversation with them, and that they wanted to have this conversation and share it with the broader public. And one of the things that we're doing a little bit differently for this episode is we are using the visual recording, and the visual recording is going to be available on our YouTube station and our channel. If you want to check the full video recording, is simply the Creative Psychotherapist podcast, and you can watch the interview in our little Zoom squares. Um, if you would like to see everyone's faces, and I highly encourage you to do so. Enjoy the conversation.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative-focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thank you so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I am very excited to introduce my guests for today, and really excited to bring this conversation to listeners here. And I'm going to introduce three different therapists, and after I introduce them, they're going to introduce themselves a little bit as well. So, we are welcoming Reggie Matthew to the show. Reggie is an integrative, neuroscience-informed social work psychotherapist. a narrative freelance journalist, a digital artist, and an expressive arts advocate. As a freelance narrative journalist, she works on a wide range of human interest issues that focus on health, recovery, the arts, and resiliency. Understanding place and context are central values in her writing. Her storytelling is informed by her education in academia, mental health, social work, and community advocacy. She has written for PBS, Next Avenue, Coping with Cancer Magazine, the United Brain Association, Post Polio Health International, and Advance for occupational therapy practitioners. In her counseling work, her primary worldview is a biopsychosocial narratology lens, which is inspired by her background in narrative journalism. It's crucial for her to understand people in the context of their real-time environment, their cultural time environment. And her narrative lens is intersectional, with a commitment to understanding the complex identities we hold along class, culture, location, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and accessibility. Please welcome Dr. Reggie Matthew.
Thank you, Raina. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'd like to describe myself. I'm a woman of color with Black hair. I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a red shirt with a white t-shirt. And I'm also in my office in a sage green backdrop. And it's a pleasure to be with you all today.
Thank you. Thank you for describing where you are. And we also have psychotherapist Sara Tsutsumi. She is a seasoned psychotherapist who utilizes Gestalt therapy and expressive arts therapy approaches, working with bilingual Japanese English speakers and the general population for family, personal relationship issues, adjustment, bicultural issues, depression, eating disorders, anxiety, and traumas with adults and seniors. She employs guided imagery, dance movement, visual arts, music as a way of connecting the person to their own power and insight. Her uniquely empathic listening ability and positive acceptance of individuals' wellness is the hallmark of her style. And she has a private practice in Greenwich Village. And she's also a fellow graduate of my alma mater, Leslie University. So I'm always excited to welcome fellow Leslie grads. So welcome, Sara.
Thank you, Reina. I grew up in Japan, and so I am Japan. And then my parents is Japanese, and I have a very short hair, but with turban. I think it's a bluish color, and then so yeah, I'm a people of color, and then I'm wearing reddish dress, I believe, and green flower shaped necklace. Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we also have Marshall Lyles, and you might, if you're a listener, you may have been introduced to Marshall before. He was on last September talking about parts work in play and poetry therapy, and that was Voices from the Expressive Therapy Summit, episode 6, which was a wonderful conversation. Marshall is an approved consultant for EMDRIA. He's licensed marriage and family therapist and practicing counselor and registered play therapist, and does a lot of supervision and all of that. He has over 20 years experience practicing in family and play therapy, drawing on lessons learned from working with attachment trauma in a variety of mental health settings. Marshall regularly teaches on sand tray therapy, other expressive modalities such as poetry and attachment-informed family work around the globe. In addition to co-authoring the book, Advanced Sand Tray Therapy, Digging Deeper into Clinical Practice, he is also a faculty member in Texas State University's Institute for Play Therapy Sand Tray Certification Program, and also teaches in the Interpersonal Neurobiology Program at Portland Community College. Welcome, Marshall.
Thanks, Raina. It's good to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
My pronouns are he, him, and I am a white male and wearing a blue shirt with very short brown hair. Today I'm sitting in my teaching space that I've, since COVID, have been using also as my client space. So behind me are walls of sand tray miniatures and all of my pottery supplies for my ceramics studio.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all, and I think it would be helpful. We'll kind of go in order. We'll start with you, Dr. Reji. Can you share a little bit about your path into becoming an expressive arts advocate and therapist?
Thank you, Raina. So I am a person who uses a chair. I have a neuromuscular disability, and the arts was central in my life, throughout my life, in the world of medical rehabilitation. So that's how my interest in the arts began. When I started as a freelance writer, I would write avidly and broadly about the role of art, specifically in medical recovery, music therapy in the treatment of TBI. I wrote an article about Moses Hamilton, who's one of my favorite mouth painters, who discovered it after an accidental injury when he transitioned to a chair. I've written about music and Alzheimer's care. So the idea of the arts being very interwoven and integral to both medical and psychological recovery is something that I studied over 10 years in my freelance work. And during that time, I did a lot of independent study in music therapy, drama therapy, art therapy, movement, narrative, and storytelling. And that's when I decided to bring it all together and go for the formal training and certification, which I'm completing currently, to become a registered expressive arts therapist with the Center for Creative Arts Therapy in Chicago. What I've learned in studying intermodal arts and intermodal psychotherapy is that intermodal processing is intrinsic, I think, to probably many people with disabilities, and particularly for myself. It is the way that I process the world. It is the way that I problem solve on a daily basis. So for example, when you have a limited range of motion and I want to think about getting through the day in my chair, the first thing I would rely on is my visual system. I would imagine, how would I get from point A to point B? So intermodal processing is the way that I process the world. So for example, I'll listen to music to be able to think through a challenge. I'll both do written journaling and visual journaling at the end of the day. So it's very central to my problem solving style, my personal arts practice. And so now I'm in a stage of interweaving it holistically into both my clinical work and my teaching.
Beautiful. I love how you described it, and how you're really integrating and utilizing that in every aspect of what you're doing. Thank you so much. Sara, I'd love to be able to understand your journey into becoming an expressive arts therapist.
Thank you. Thank you, Reina. I started very early. I came here in this country from Japan I was already quite old, but I started at Boston University Psychology Department, and I got the BA from BA from them, and then I really wanted to do therapy, just concentrating on therapy, and then somebody told me about the Reji College. Back then we were calling the school Reji College, and I went to Art Institute. So that was 86, and so I was with Paolo J. Canio, Dr. Canio, for for 2 years, because he made some very special class for us my second year. So I was there for 2 different core groups, like really intermodal hours, like about 2.5 hours, 2 times a week. So it was just very strong experience for me, and I felt the intermodal expressive therapy felt like really my second skin. And then I back then I was there was only another person of color was there, and so, and then also Leslie College and especially Art Institute was very organic kind of place. So they didn't really have special accommodation to say, but they just really, dealt with, my situation. And also my second year, there was this lady with wheelchair with a van where she drove, so around the campus. So she was from same country like Dr. Camille, Bernadette, and so they really kind of adapted us into their situation, their curriculum. So it wasn't so accommodating in a way, but it's accommodated us in a way too. And so I'm very also I became totally blind when I was 8. Cause was glaucoma, congenital glaucoma, so that they our illness, eye illness, is interestingly very vivid colors we see often in our when we are losing the sight. And then so I became I was a very, very visual person, and I am very visual still. And I love listening to my clients make, noise with, their crayons or pens or pencils on the paper. Or also these days, people use iPad to do, drawings and stuff. And I really love listening to that and feel excited about. And then when I get to know what they did, they tell me, and I just get very excited to see it. I mean, experience that way. Yeah. Thank you, Reina.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Sara. It's very inspiring that that you're coming on and sharing your story so that other people can see themselves as being able to have a practice and not to allow how they're experiencing the world to interfere with their ability to connect with clients. It sounds like you have really navigated that in a way that's meaningful for both you and the people that you serve.
Thank you.
Yeah. Marshall, how about you? How did you kind of navigate your way? Obviously, you're doing a wide variety of things in the expressive arts too.
Mhm. But I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes I'm a little baffled about how I got to therapy at all. It was not on my radar. I grew up in very rural Texas, and there were 6 occupations that you really considered going into when you were growing up, and therapist was not anywhere near that list. And in fact, what I wanted to be, what I studied in my undergrad, was a writer. I went to school for communications and English, and I thought that was where I was headed. And then through a series of events at the very end of my bachelor's program, it was a wise professor of mine who said, every time you write, you're doing therapy. Why don't you go check out what it would be like to be a therapist? And so she's the one who introduced me to a professor in a marriage and family grad program, and kind of made way for me to even know that could be an option. So I was started off right off the bat in marriage and family in a play therapy based study. And my first internship was in a medical hospital. And I really spent so much of my life in my young adulthood trying to prove that I didn't have a disability. I was not at peace with my body. I'd been born into a hereditary condition, a version of muscular dystrophy, and knew that it was going to be a lifelong journey of it progressing and becoming more and more problematic physically. And I just tried to prove to the world all the time how capable I was. And then I ended up in this medical setting to do my first clinical experience, where the part of me that those patients most needed was my pain, my vulnerability, my story. And I was confronted about, how am I going to make my disability part of my profession instead of something I'm trying to run away from? And over the years, as I found my way to more and more, I studied the expressive arts one at a time. I started realizing it was really in the expressive community where I felt all of those parts of me that had often been confusing in the outer world, and the parts of me that didn't always know how to access and make use of in the expressive world, they made sense. And so through sand and poetry and clay, I found more and more access to myself, which made me more available to the people who were trusting me to help them access themselves. So I feel really grateful for this kind of gift from the universe of a path I would have never known to choose.
Yeah, in some ways, sometimes I feel like the arts chooses us. It's like it's a non-negotiable. You don't really have a choice about it. It just keeps pulling you in, beckoning you in, and that's what's beautiful about it. Yeah, thank you. And so let's kind of shift a little bit and talk a little bit more about how you all take steps to adapt your work. Not only, in the adaptations that you might use for yourself as the practicing clinician, but also how that influences how you think about making adaptations for the clients which you serve. Dr. Mathew?
I thank you, Raina. I have permission from Sara to share this story because she is the inspiration for this panel. When I first met Sara, we talked about her process, and she said something to me that was so impactful. that one of the challenges that she's had in her journey is people making the assumption that because she's blind, she can't see.
Mhm.
And when I learned about her process of her clients creating artwork and her immersing herself in the listening to the kinesthetic experience of them creating the art, and then them describing it to her and her being able to see it in her mind's eye. And I've had that experience in consulting with her. Her inner visual aesthetic is so vast.
Mhm.
So first, I guess what I want to say is that we are all socialized into so many social constructions
Mm.
about how people can express themselves. What is ability? What are the bridges that we can build? So I think first that this is an opportunity to really challenge some of those social constructions.
Mhm.
So consulting and working with Sara is always a transcendent experience for me because her capacity to see and me to work with my physical range. The expressive arts is a realm that we enter where there are no limits. So in
Mm.
terms of how I adapt my own process in art, I use digital work because it takes less physical energy, but an app, for example, like Procreate, gives me the full experience of a studio art method. You know, studio art is part of art therapy training, but the studio art format is not accessible to me. But Procreate gives you the experience of watercolor, of paint, of charcoal. It's just amazing to be able to visually create what you would normally with maybe more standard muscle strength. With dance therapy, I'm deeply influenced by the Dancing for Parkinson's community or the Dance for All facilitation community, that when you combine music, movement, and imagination, it somehow communicates to the brain and you have access to more mobility.
Mm.
You know, with music, I've studied the world of percussion and drumming. So percussion, I feel like with percussion, there are so many kinds of percussive instruments, even body percussion, that is so accessible to anyone. So I feel like I've always made a commitment to building a bridge to each one of the expressive arts. And when I work with a client, I will always say, this is as far as I can go with you. And then I'll use my language or drama therapy or dramatization to give them the support and the permission to go further to their level of ability.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. Sara, how about you? So, what is your approach to adapting your work as a clinician, but also how you make adaptations for the clients that you serve?
Yes. I am always very excited to meet new person, and then I tell them that, you know, if they have when they enter my studio, you know, I ask them if they have enough light, because I don't even sense the lighting, so light or dark, I mean.
Mhm.
So that's what I do to start our session. And I'm very flexible and eclectic and open, as intermodal expressive art therapy is, I think. So that sometimes we just talk, but oftentimes from the talk, I ask, you know, my client to come to the drawing table to draw with different material. And so and then as I said before, I hear them, you know, making you know, lines or like some dots or something, you know, I could hear that, and that's really exciting to me. And how they I ask them what they see on the paper. They seem to really change, just, you know, seated on the couch talking about themselves, to come to, you know, drawing table to draw something, and they kind of really excited themselves to really see what they could do. And this recently one lady said, "Oh, I'm very self-conscious. I don't, you know, I never did this before. Just only when I was, you know, pre-kindergarten or something." And I said, "Yeah, don't worry, because I can't see." So I can't see what you do. So, and she was very kind of eased by it. So she was, you know, yeah, she was doing, you know, drawing on her way, and it really worked for her, and she seemed to be more like relaxed or open. So yeah, yeah, and then I see mainly people of color. I mean, Pan Asian people, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, and Black person, and yeah, lots of different Asian people. Yeah, I see. Yeah, yeah. So,
do you have space in your studio for people to dance?
Yes, this when I'm sitting in one side of my place, and it has quite a good space for not acrobatic dance, but you know, some, you know, organic movement, which you know, I usually like. And then I have some percussion stuff, instruments, so they can use them too. And somehow lately I use drawing a lot, and but I do have dancers in my practice, so I use dance to, you know, of course, for them to get in touch with themselves, and you know, talk about their movement. And so yeah, I have okay space. Yeah, it's not big, but yeah, still, yeah, they can move. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And how about you, Marshall?
Well, one of the things that I've learned is I have to be very organized, because efficiency of movement just makes a big difference. And so I keep everything tidy and spaced out, and even pre-sorted, you know, that instead of having to open packages, I have all of my art supplies in jars with open lids, and more pragmatic things to make it easier on my hands, and just save steps. You know, there's this theory out in the world called the spoon theory, about people who deal with disability and pain, that you wake up and you only have so many spoons for the day. And it varies depending on, you know, how you feel in different situations, and maybe how much energy you expended the day before. And so I don't want to spend my spoons gathering supplies, you know, because every step I take costs me a little energy that I could give to my client. So I've just had to learn to organize my space a little differently in order to be able to hold them, and not fatigue myself too easily. And then there are other things just over time, you know, you start learning to innovate in order to adapt. And like my big group sand tray is on a turntable, because it's really important to be able to see it from all angles, but it's just harder. It's more cumbersome for me some days, other days not, to get around the table. And so I now have a table that spins instead of having to get around it. And so over the time, you know, you just come up with these moments that are meant to save you a few spoons. And then they become everyday practice. And I forget to think about the fact that I've done them. You know, I forget to call them an adaptation, because they just are more survival.
Yeah, I think the word that comes to mind is innovation. That that because you're looking at the world through a different lens, you're able to innovate in ways that really would be meaningful, I think, to all therapists. Any sand tray therapist, I think, would be delighted to have a spinning table. That's a beautiful innovation, and would just, it's so much ease for all.
One of my kids told me, they're young adults now, but when we were having it built, they said, why do we judge Susan so much and call her lazy? So we've now, instead of it being on a lazy Susan, it's an energetic Susan that we that we use.
I love that. Very cool. So what challenges and what are the challenges that you've experienced as a result of your lived experience in this world and providing therapy, but also what are the gifts that your human experience has afforded you? I think we kind of shared a little bit in how it definitely gives a different space for empathy with clients. But maybe we could go into a little more detail. Dr. Mathew?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Raina. I've always said that I feel like the ability disability framework is such a flawed framework. I prefer the framework of what they use in vocal work, which is expressive range. An expressive range. So, when on American Idol, they say, this is your vocal range, or this is the right song for the voice. Everyone has an expressive range. And that to me is a better framework. So what I would say is, in the actual concrete world, my physical range may be limited, but my expressive range is broad. And that's thanks to the gift of the intermodal creative landscape. And the arts are a limitless space of expression. That we all have expressive range, and we've all had this experience with working with the arts, that when someone enters the art, that range grows in terms of their ability to imagine, their ability to express themselves, their ability to move. So I would say the framework that I prefer is to say, what is this person's expressive range? How can it grow? How can we bring more fluidity to it, more flexibility? And so I would say the hardest thing for me is social constructions of ableism or bias or assumptions that people have, similar to what I shared about Sara, that's something that you're always negotiating on a macro or micro level, macro or microaggressions. You see those assumptions that at the forefront all the time. But what I would say is, I live in the world of possibilities because of the expressive arts. That is really the world that I live in now. Music, gives me the gift of nuance, teaches me that hope is in the intricacies. In movement and dance therapy, I'm just simply trying a different movement opens up freedom, because I don't normally move that way. In arts, which is visual processing, just a shift of a little color can shift a perspective.
Oh, yeah.
So I would say that even though in the literal world, there's the world of biases and assumptions and social constructions, which I feel that you're always negotiating when you're different, in the world of the arts, it's just this boundaryless, limitless space of possibilities. I would say the gift of being who I am is that I'm innately intermodal. And similar to what Sara said, intermodal work feels like my second skin. And now having the professional language it's just a constant place of hope and discovery.
I love your reframing and that use of the term or the phrase expressive range. I've never had anybody describe it in that way before, but it really is a beautiful way of capturing. We all have an ability to express ourselves in a range within our capacity to do so, and stretch. Like we can, stretch through practice and being willing to be playful and experimental, and that creates lots of growth and possibility and potential. But when we kind of live in that, the duality or the, black and white of the binary, right? The able or
Yeah, binary, exactly.
right, that, oh man, it's just so limiting
Mhm.
and keeps people stuck. And I think as therapists, that's really what we're doing with everyone we're working with. We're trying to get them out of those binary constructed cognitive distortions that are impacting them, and get them to stretch and express. And so I love that, and I'm going to steal that and use that expressive range and put that into my vocabulary. So thank you for that gift. I appreciate that. Sara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure what I want to say, but what I just thinking about is that when I graduated from Leslie, that was like 1990, around that time. And it was kind of disappointing situation because I was interned in during my study at the Art Institute of Leslie. I had worked after school program and also nursing facility, but it's a daycare center for seniors.
Mhm.
And then I really was interested in working with seniors, but there was very interestingly, as I think of it, they just really didn't like me being blind. Like when I go do interview, first thing they say, oh, you should have told me if you are blind, you shouldn't have come. So that is like a supervisor's attitude. And so I feel that is greatly changed in these, especially these few years or these 10 years. And I really never been able to work in settings like that. And I think it makes kind of a sense because there could be lots of logistic difficulties because I cannot see. But I think for my experience becoming a therapist, private practice has been very fertile experience, and that now 30 years later, I finally caught up, like being a therapist on the street of Manhattan, where 10 other people are practicing therapy, different type of therapies, I think, but also lots of, expressive arts people too here, in New York. But I'm very proud of myself now that, I'm kind of doing it, amongst these white people, white men, women, and but I'm I'm a person of color, but I'm still thriving in my private practice, and people are telling me they like my work, that the clients, and I'm very happy about that. So I don't know if I said what I should have said, but I don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I think that you did describe the challenge, that was an immediate challenge that you faced, that people were limiting your ability to practice because of your sight. And and the way that you see the world. And that's upsetting. And I am glad to hear that you feel that the world is changing and more open and receptive. But moreover, I'm I'm really glad to hear your story of resiliency, of saying just because they don't see my capability doesn't mean that I don't recognize what I can do and the impact that I can make to go out and create your own practice. Where, I mean, if you're going to make it in Manhattan, right, you can make it anywhere. Isn't that what they say?
And a thriving and diverse practice, if I could add.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you, Reina. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
How about you, Marshall? What have the challenges been for you?
I think it's really important for me to first acknowledge that I don't have as many challenges as others who have more intersectionality. That I have a lot of privilege in this profession, and so that feels important to name. Going into before discussing any of the other. Some of the challenges that have often been internal, more because of what I inherited from the world, than I brought into the field with me. And that's not to say that our field doesn't have some issues with awareness that really need to be addressed, tragically. But there's so much of the time that I just kind of learned to suppress my voice a little, or that somehow personal advocacy was going to be met with some shame, or at the very least someone treating you as inconvenient. And so you more and more can pull into self-reliance, not in a way that's always just about autonomy, but sometimes there's a way of then being less relational by accident. And so I brought some of that into the field, and then occasionally get to have these wonderful moments of surprise where people show up in ways that I wasn't expecting. And then other times there are moments where, people in power, from professors to, employers and things, confirm, some of the ableism in the outside world. And so I've probably more had to deal with it at an emotional level, in an emotional space, than anything else. There are moments like trying to speak at a conference, and having to point out, well, you've got me here now, but I can't get on that stage. What are we going to do to get me up there? And or getting into a season of being invited to travel to speak. And the reality is that I fly in a cramped up space, and I'm going to be no good for a couple of days once I get there. And so how can I make space to afford, to have the extra time to recover in order to get to do the job that more able-bodied professionals would be able to not have to think about. And so there's constant strategy sessions and thinking through, how to communicate to people so that I think I worry that it's going to come across as being some sort of entitled diva, instead of just saying, I will do really good work, but you're going to have to give me a little extra space in order to get there. And those are some of the messages that I often have to overcome. And then also, it took me a while to realize that to kind of embrace my own neurodivergence that has come as a reality of living in the body that I live in, that I process information differently. And I even sometimes will be set up to miss that in my clients if I'm not in a space of more acceptance with that part of myself, with that challenge I experience. So recently I had someone come in to do some Santre work, and their experience of being neurodivergent created a lot of anxiety for them in my space because there were so many options available to them. And I hadn't considered that for this person, because I had worked so hard to make the space where I could easily pick things up, that I hadn't yet considered that there were going to be people who had a different kind of challenge, and we were going to then have to work, challenge to find these new moments of creativity, to figure out how to be together in that. And so for them, it just took me pre-sorting some things and making a smaller selection available to them, and which cost me a little time. That's one of the challenges too, is I have to have more time before and after sessions in order to get to do that kind of work. But at the same time, the challenge brings a new way of thinking. I feel like I then get this benefit of these new synaptic connections that maybe others in different types of bodies wouldn't have the chance to grow into. So I take the challenges, but I'm gonna go ahead and give myself credit for the advantages that the challenges have brought.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And what a beautiful opportunity to kind of have that dance together of navigating how can we come together to support each other in the same space and have both of our needs met and accommodated. And I think that's a beautiful experience for the client to then be able to go out into the larger world and say, okay, well, I've had this really positive experience where I've been able to have that conversation and work through it, that they have that modeled, that they can go out. Because I imagine, I can't speak for everybody, but I imagine that is something that brings up a lot of anxiety for people. Yeah, so thank you. I know I had a client a while ago who had had muscular dystrophy and was pretty impacted uh, physically, but we spent a lot of time talking about this concept of how people that design the world for a differently abled body aren't differently abled. And so the designs that they think are going to be really helpful are not. And so they were thinking about how they could use their creativity and design mind to impact and shift that for others. And I was always really inspired by the way he viewed the world and saw things from his perspective. It's important for all of us who are doing this work to really think about. Yeah. So challenges and gifts come together simultaneously. And I think for other therapists that are coming out into the world and wanting to go out and create their own practice and their own way of doing things, that comes with a lot of challenges and a lot of anxiety. Is there any advice that you all would share to others coming into this field, coming into this work and wanting to go out on their own? Any practical advice that you would share that would be a benefit to them? I'll start with you, Dr. Matthew.
Well, first I want to say that the overarching principle is that universal design is for everyone. So this conversation is a conversation in universal design that everyone gains. Everyone gains in society when there is diversity, a range of options of how people can express themselves, how work can be adapted, the pace of work. And the pandemic has shown us that a little bit, just the range of ways that people can participate and be part of community. And that's and dramatically that happened overnight. So I would say first, we all can contribute to the language of safety and the language of neurodiversity by creating such spaces as we have today. So thank you so much, Raina, Marshall, and Sara, to talk about essentially universal design, that is a place that includes everyone. Inclusion is something that we always have to keep shaping of what would that look like. And we saw some really beautiful examples today. The second thing I would say to any new student who wants to come into the field is that creative solutions are inclusive solutions. Creativity is inherently inclusive. The process of creativity, the color blue can be infused with green, right? That movement can be infused with a sound. Every time I go into the creative space, creative solutions are inclusive solutions. So don't be afraid to ask questions of how things could be adapted. That creativity is a landscape of safety and inclusion. So the environment you may be in may never have met someone like you, or may never have learned how to adapt their environment or work options to include a person like you. So don't be afraid to ask questions, to reach out to an organization, to speak with your advisor about what is possible, because it just may not have been considered in that environment. So remember, I would say, when you get overwhelmed, first go to your creative practice, because that's what I do. I'll sketch it out. I'll draw it out. I'll move it out. I'll first give myself a little space of inner freedom. I'm feeling trapped at this moment. Can I at least give myself some inner freedom to find the language I need to be able to build a bridge to someone else? And then once you give yourself that inner freedom, then you'll give yourself the language of safety to bring it out into the world in whatever way that's needed.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. Sara, would you have any advice that you would give to young therapists coming out and, wanting to create their own practice as well?
Yes. We three are all, really, spent many years building our world, our unique, each unique world. But for young people starting, I would like, them to really advocate for themselves, and which I didn't do too much when I was, starting. And I really would like, for everybody, not only just thinking about private practice, but taking a part in a community setting like a daycare center for seniors and stuff like that. I think it's possible. And, there are like a problem like, you have to serve lunches and stuff like that. But I believe there is a way to adapt to, if you are blind or if you are differently able. I want to, supervisor to think differently. So you could, and I really want to young people to work on that too. And as a woman and woman of color, and I'm small, not tall or, something like that. You have to really recognize often the words don't want to hear you, like they make you feel like gaslighted. Yeah, very much of the time. So it's just like it's so important for you to insist, listen to me, listen to me. I'm saying the right thing, and this thing happened to me, and it's just really important for us to us people of color and women to be heard is very, very important, I think. And so, and especially when you are blind or when you are on wheelchair, like they have very strange assumption that we don't have same brain, like rest of the world or something. So I think it's really important for us to speak out and advocate for ourselves. And I'm learning that lately too. So, I was very, what do you call it, naive when I was going through the program and when I came out from the program. But I'm realizing it is not easy still, but I think the world is opening up a bit by bit, I hope. So I really encourage everybody to advocate for themselves too. Yes.
I love that. Really stepping into your empowered self to be able to say, this is me and this is what I'm going to do, regardless of your perception of what I'm capable of doing. I think that is so important because we all receive those messages of like, are you sure you want to do that? That just doesn't seem like a wise decision. How are you going to make it doing that? There's a lot of those kinds of narratives, which are really coming from the other person's perception of their own limitation of, what they perceive they're able to do or not able to do, and have nothing to do with us. And it is so important for us to use our voice and to stand up for what we know is right for us. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Thank you, Raina.
Marshall, how about you? Any sage advice you would offer to others going on down this journey too?
Well, that others will have to decide how sage it is, but I definitely have some opinions that come to mind. One is, find your community. That everything feels so much more within reach when you're surrounded with people who delight in you, who see your value, who understand that your point of view is needed and is worthy, and are also willing to challenge you anytime you are coming up against some self-limiting beliefs. And so finding your people makes a big difference in this profession. Join peer consultation groups, or be brave enough if you hear someone speak and you think, oh, they might have access to a community that I could need, then to ask, to inquire. That's one of the reasons I'm so grateful to Reggie for bringing the three of us together to get to be with you today, Raina. Is after we got together for our first chat, the three of us, for days after, I felt the impact and just felt lifted and understood, and I carried that. And then what I also noticed, speaking to what Sara was saying, is advocacy, self-advocacy felt so much more within reach after having been with a community of people where I didn't have to work as hard to explain myself. I then felt more empowered and ready and brave to explain to others what I was needing from them. And the other thing is to remember that when you advocate for yourself to people in power in our profession, you're either going to get the accommodation you need or you're going to get information you need. There is going to be an outcome that's helpful to you. It may be sad, there may be grief that comes, but it was information you needed to know about that person or that organization or that part of the field. And then you can start making decisions about how to make your own way if no one's making space for you. But I for a long time lived afraid of that information. And once I started getting it, I realized that there's a lot of freedom in just knowing.
I think that does translate to sage.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So important. Yeah. Would any of you have any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to say before we end our conversation today?
Well, I want to just say that this is a profound moment of cultural reckoning in the US where we're looking at this intersectional lens. And I just want to thank you for bringing in this thread of the intersectional dialogue. I do think that many people do need this space, and either they have a loved one or a friend or a colleague, and we won't know what's possible if we don't speak it. So I just want to thank you for creating this space, to speaking for possibilities, for allowing us to speak on the possibilities of a meaningful creative life.
Mm. I'm so grateful that you reached out to me and proposed this idea. It definitely something that I wanted to do, but something that I was hesitant to do, to reach out to others to ask that. And so I'm grateful that you brought the idea to me, and that I'm able to facilitate the process and share your stories with our therapy community and other creative people who themselves have their own expressive range, to use your terminology, and inspire them to consider things that maybe they weren't considering because of the limited perception of the societal norms and cultural vantage points. So I really appreciate all of your willingness to be here and your willingness to share your truth.
I like to say the art is the answer for everything, and it's very, very it's like our lifeblood and the beating heart. So I really believe in power of art. So I hope it doesn't matter what you do, but to try to get engaged to art, in general. Differently able or normally able people. So it's a very important time. I feel so hurt by hearing about Afghanistan situation, and because it's so against my belief. So I'm almost always crying these days because it's so hard to hear that. And I don't know what we could do, but I like, everybody to pursue or relate to art all the time.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Reina, for this opportunity for us.
Oh, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for listeners who would like to reach out, get to know you a little bit more, know your work a little bit more. Where can they find you, Dr. Mathew?
They can find me at my website at Reggie Matthew PhD writer.com. They can reach out to me. I do mostly expressive arts group work and community-based group work, but I also do creativity coaching and supervision. So they're welcome to reach out to me through my website.
Beautiful. Okay. And so that's going to be www.Reji, RejiMathewPhD-writer.com. Yep. And Sara, where can people find you?
Yes, my website is saratsutsumi.com, and which is www.SARATS, T like Tom, S like Sam, U, and again TSU, M as in Mary, I. It's saratsutsumi.com, COM, and I do individual psychotherapy, and right now I'm not doing any like couples or groups or family work, and but also I am open to doing the clinical supervision for psychotherapy and expressive art therapy. Yes, especially. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Reina.
And Marshall, where can people find you and your work?
So if you go to my website, which is my name, marshalllyles.com, MARSHALLLYLES .com, you will get my email and social media, as well as a link to my other website. That's my workshop space here. So all of that is linked through the one URL.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will make sure to put all of that information in the show notes so that everyone can find you. And thank you all so much for your willingness to get up really early on a Saturday morning and do this.
Marshall. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Reina.
Hey there. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I really, truly loved having this conversation with these three amazing humans and talking about their experience. And I'm just so grateful for their vulnerability and willingness to share about their experience here with me and with you all. And there were some things that really spoke to me. I loved Reggie's use of the term expressive range and how meaningful that is, that we all have different expressive range, and there really are no limitations except for the ones that we place on ourselves. There's always an alternative approach to expressing ourselves or finding a different avenue to express. And I think that each person kind of shared how their perspective has helped them to hold space for other people and encourage them to find ways of expression that are meaningful to them. So I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And I'll talk at you next week. Don't forget to head over to the YouTube channel, the Creative Psychotherapist Podcast, and catch the whole video replay of the episode so you can see the conversation in real time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.